And now over to the growing mystery surrounding the death of 18-year-old Nolan Wells.
Horn Island sits about 11 miles off the Mississippi coast, a slip of federally protected wilderness in the Gulf of Mexico, reachable only by boat. No roads, no cell towers, just sand, scrub pine, and water on every side. On the 4th of July, it's one of the most popular stretches of coastline in the region. Boats raft up along the shallows, coolers come out, families and friend groups spread out across the beach for the day, and by evening most of them go home. On July 4th, 2026, 18-year-old Nolan Wells went to Horn Island with a group of friends. He did not come home that night. 2 days later, his body was recovered in the water near the shoreline where he was last seen. What happened in between the hours he spent on that island, and the version of events told by the friends who were with him, is now the subject of a law enforcement investigation, an independent inquiry commissioned by his family, and a great deal of public attention. This is what is known so far. Nolan Xavier Wells was 18 years old, from Ocean Springs, Mississippi, a small coastal city just north of Horn Island across the Mississippi Sound. Friends and family have described him as a young man with a big personality, a football player, known for lifting other people up, the kind of person who showed up to a room with a joke ready. His mother, Christine Wansley, would later write that he was always willing to cheer and uplift others, and that raising him felt like watching someone take real care and time over who he became. By all accounts, July 4th began like any other holiday outing. A group of friends, a boat, and a plan to spend the day on one of the coast's most popular barrier islands. According to GPS data obtained from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, the boat carrying Wells and his friends left its dock at approximately 9:56 in the morning on July 4th. It arrived at Horn Island a little over an hour later at 11:14 a.m. From there, the day unfolded much like it does for thousands of other visitors to the island every Independence Day. Investigators and outside observers have both noted that the beach was unusually crowded that afternoon. Boats packed in close groups spread across the sand, and according to one search and rescue volunteer who spoke to the group afterward, a fair amount of drinking taking place up and down the shoreline. That detail matters for a specific reason. The waters around Horn Island are known for their currents. If someone were to end up in the water unexpectedly, those currents could carry them a meaningful distance from where they entered, a fact search organizers would return to just days later. Wells was last seen on the island at around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. According to his family's attorney, the accounts of what happened in the time immediately after that have not lined up cleanly. This is the part of the story that remains the most contested, and the part investigators are focused on resolving. Nolan Wells did not return to the boat with the rest of his group. Exactly why is where the accounts diverge. Attorney Ben Crump, representing the Wells family, has said that the friends who were on the trip have given differing explanations. In one version, relayed by a young woman Wells had reportedly been talking to on the island, Wells said he intended to head back and rejoin his friends on the boat. In another version, given by the boys who were on the trip, Wells told them he planned to stay behind and continue talking with her. Crump has publicly described this discrepancy as a contradiction that needs to be resolved, not evidence of wrongdoing in itself, but a gap in the record that matters, because it's one of the last known accounts of Wells before he went missing. According to the boat's GPS data, the vessel left Horn Island without him at 4:31 p.m. It returned to its original dock, then made an additional stop traveling into a nearby waterway called Fort Bayou at around 5:52 p.m., before returning to the dock again at 6:06 p.m. The reason for that additional stop has not been publicly explained by investigators. At some point that evening, one of Wells's friends contacted his mother, Christine Wansley, to tell her Nolan hadn't come back with them. That call came in at around 11 p.m. Christine Wansley did what any parent would do. She began reaching out first to friends, then to authorities. In the early hours of July 5th, she posted publicly asking if anyone had information about her son's whereabouts. She formally reported him missing to local law enforcement. What followed was a rapidly expanding search effort. The Jackson County Sheriff's Office coordinated with the U.S. Coast Guard, the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, and the National Park Service, since Horn Island falls under federal parkland as part of the Gulf Islands National Seashore. A Louisiana-based volunteer search and rescue organization, the United Cajun Navy, joined the effort as well, conducting aerial searches over the water surrounding the island. The group's vice president, Brian Trasher, later told reporters that he'd spoken with several people who had been on the island that day. His account matched the general picture: a packed beach, boats everywhere, drinking, and currents strong enough that if someone had ended up in the water, they could have been carried some distance from shore. For roughly 48 hours, the search continued without resolution. Wansley posted again during that stretch, describing a family in agony waiting, she wrote, for her son to walk through the door with a smile and a joke, the way he always did. On July 6th, that wait ended. A body matching Nolan Wells' description was recovered from the water near the shoreline of Horn Island. Jackson County Coroner Bruce Lind told reporters at the time that there were no immediately obvious signs of physical injury on the body, a detail that would later become significant, both for what it suggested and for how much it left unanswered. Identification was confirmed through dental records, and by that afternoon, Lind had confirmed to local station WLOX that the body was Nolan Wells. Christine Wansley confirmed her son's death publicly that same day, thanking the community, the search volunteers, and law enforcement for their effort and asking for space to grieve as a family. An autopsy was conducted the following day, July 7th, at the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office. As of the most recent reporting on this case, those results, the official cause and manner of death, have not been publicly released. Within days, the Wells family retained attorney Ben Crump, a name that has become closely associated over the past decade with high-profile cases involving the deaths of young Black Americans and the demand for transparency from local authorities. Crump's involvement changed the shape of the story almost immediately. His office announced it would conduct an independent review of the circumstances surrounding Wells' death, separate from the Sheriff's Department's own investigation, and would push for the release of witness statements, records, and autopsy findings as they became available. Crump has been direct about why the family felt this step was necessary. In his words, the family wanted someone with no ties to Mississippi law enforcement examining what happened to their son, someone whose findings couldn't be questioned on the basis of local relationships or institutional loyalty. That desire led to a decision that would end up dominating headlines for the next 2 weeks, flying Wells' body to Washington, D.C. for a second independent autopsy. The independent autopsy was funded in part by former NFL quarterback and civil rights activist Colin Kaepernick, according to Crump's office. Crump initially said the results were expected within days, potentially by Friday, July 10th. That timeline slipped. Delays attributed to canceled flights affecting the transport of materials or personnel pushed the release date back repeatedly. As of the family's meeting with local prosecutors on July 15th, those results still had not been made public. Crump has continued to say the findings are expected soon, without giving a firm date. This gap between a death that drew massive public attention and a set of medical findings that still, weeks later, have not been released has become one of the defining features of the case. It has also become fertile ground for speculation, which is worth addressing directly later in this script. One detail that has drawn particular scrutiny involves Wells's cell phone. According to Crump, Wells's parents located his phone before law enforcement did. Crump has publicly called this unusual, noting that it would be uncommon for a teenager to be separated from his phone at all, let alone for his family to recover it ahead of investigators. The Jackson County Sheriff's Office has since asked the public for help gathering additional evidence. Any photos, videos, or eyewitness accounts from Horn Island on July 4th, including anything that might have unintentionally captured Wells on camera, given how crowded the beach was that day. On July 15th, following their meeting with the district attorney, Wells' family and their legal team agreed to a mutual inspection of the phone, meaning experts representing both the family and law enforcement would examine its contents together, rather than either side working from it independently. That review had not concluded as of the most recent public updates. The boat's trouble on the way back. Roughly 2 weeks into the case, new audio surfaced that added another layer to the story. According to reporting based on that audio, Wells' friends radioed for help on the return trip from Horn Island because their boat had begun taking on water. It's important to be precise about what this detail does and doesn't tell us, and it does not, on its own, explain why Wells stayed behind, and it doesn't resolve the broader questions about the day's timeline. What it does confirm is that the boat experienced some kind of mechanical or structural problem significant enough to prompt a distress call during the same return trip on which Wells was not aboard. Investigators have not publicly stated whether or how that malfunction connects to the rest of the timeline. By the second week of July, Nolan Wells' name had moved well beyond the Mississippi Gulf Coast. Reverend Al Sharpton appeared alongside the family at a press conference, joining calls for a transparent investigation. The Congressional Black Caucus issued a statement backing the family's request for an independent, thorough inquiry, saying too many questions remained unanswered. Demonstrators gathered outside the National Action Network's headquarters in New York City, holding signs reading, "Justice for Nolan." Filmmaker Tyler Perry stepped in to cover funeral costs for the family, according to Crump's office. Colin Kaepernick's contribution toward the independent autopsy has already been noted. The response, in other words, reflected a familiar pattern in cases like this one: public figures and advocacy organizations mobilizing quickly around a story that touched on themes of racial disparity, institutional trust, and a family's demand to be heard. It's also worth noting plainly what makes this case racially charged in the public conversation. Wells, who was black, had been out on the water that day with a group of friends who were white. That fact alone doesn't establish what happened to him, but it is central to why the case has drawn the level of scrutiny, comparison, and public emotion that it has, and why the family's calls for an independent investigation have resonated as widely as they have. Jackson County Sheriff John Ledbetter has pushed back against the implication that his department isn't handling the case seriously. Speaking to a local CNN affiliate, he said the investigation would take real effort to get right, and he's encouraged anyone with evidence, photos, videos, anything from that day to come forward, saying it could be the piece that moves the case forward. On July 15th, Christine Wansley and Elmore Wansley Nolan's parents sat down with Jackson County District Attorney Angel Myers McElrath for the first time since their son's body had been recovered. Crump, who attended, described the meeting afterwards as respectful. According to him, the DA told the family that once the Sheriff's Department's investigation was complete, the findings would be presented to a grand jury. The DA's office was careful to clarify what that step does and doesn't mean. Convening a grand jury is standard procedure in Jackson County for any unnatural or suspicious death, and doing so is not, by itself, an indication that a crime occurred. The family said they didn't come away from the meeting with new information about the substance of the investigation. What they did leave with was the agreement on the phone review mentioned earlier, and a commitment that the process would continue moving forward. As of this recording, the Sheriff's Department's investigation is still active. No charges have been filed, no official cause of death has been announced. And for good reason. As of today, the official autopsy results have not been released. The independent autopsy results have not been released. No law enforcement agency has announced a cause or manner of death. No one has been charged with a crime. The specific contents of the contradictions Crump has referenced remain limited, in public reporting, to the one discrepancy described earlier, the differing explanations for why Wells stayed behind on the island. Everything else circulating publicly at this stage is unconfirmed. That distinction matters, both out of basic fairness to everyone involved, including the friends who were with Wells that day, none of whom has been named as a suspect or accused of a crime by investigators, and because an accurate accounting of an active investigation should stick to what investigators, the coroner, and the family's own legal representatives have actually said on the record. 2 autopsies have since been conducted, one by the state, one independently commissioned by his family, and neither set of results has been publicly released. His family's attorney has identified one specific contradiction in the accounts given by those who were with him. The county's investigation is ongoing, and its findings will ultimately go before a grand jury, a procedural step that applies to any unnatural or suspicious death in the county, not an indication of guilt. Everything else, the theories, the timelines assembled from fragments, the certainty expressed across social media by people who weren't there, remains for now exactly that: speculation, filling a space that only a completed investigation and the people who were actually on that island can close. What isn't in question is the loss at the center of it, a mother who is still waiting for real answers,